Aloha students and ohana, and welcome to today's read aloud of the BFG, The Big Friendly Giant, Chapter 7, The Marvelous Ears, and Chapter 8, Snozzcumbers. My name is Miss J, and I look forward to doing this read aloud with you. For today's video, there are 4 parts. 1, a quick write, 2, vocabulary, 3, the read aloud, and 4 questions. Some materials you may need for this video today are your copy of the BFG, the BFG comprehension packet, and a pencil. If you don't have these materials, it's totally fine. Just enjoy the read aloud. At this time, I would like to remind you folks, if you would like to pause or rewind this video at any point, feel free to do so. And if you folks are ready to begin, let's go ahead and take our BFG comprehension packet and open up to page 7. Page 7, Chapter 7, The Marvelous Ears, and Chapter 8, Snozzcumbers. To begin, our quick write prompt for today is, do you believe in anything you can't see with your eyes? What is it? If you can't see it, how do you know it's true? So go ahead and take a few minutes to answer the quick write prompt. Write freely, because you can always go back and fix it later. Now that you have completed your quick write, go ahead and turn to your vocabulary page in your workbook. And the vocabulary words for Chapter 7 are forlorn, transfigured, and contemptuously. Forlorn, the definition is to be abandoned or lonely. For transfigured, it's to transform into something beautiful, and contemptuously in a disrespectful way. So go ahead and fill out those definitions in your vocabulary packet. Now that you have completed your vocabulary, let's go ahead and get your copy of the BFG. For those of you who have the book or the PDF file, go ahead and follow along as I read. If not, let's open up to Chapter 7, The Marvelous Ears, and let's begin. Back in the cave, the big friendly giant sat Sophie down, once again on the enormous table. It was quite snuggly there in your night tie, he asked. You isn't frigid cold? I'm fine, Sophie said. I cannot help thinking, said the BFG, about your poor mother and father. Now they must be jipping and scumping all over the house, shouting, hello, hello, where is Sophie gone? I don't have a mother and father, Sophie said. They both died when I was a baby. Oh, you poor little scumplet, cried the BFG. Is you not missing them very badly? Not really, Sophie said, because I never knew them. You is making me sad, the BFG said, rubbing his eyes. Don't be sad, Sophie said. No one is going to be worrying too much about me. That place you took me from was the village orphanage. We are all orphans in there. You was an orphan? Yes. How many is there in there? 10 of us, Sophie said, all little girls. Was you happy there? The BFG asked. I hated it, Sophie said. The woman who ran it called Miss Clonkers, and if she caught you breaking any of the rules, like getting out of bed at night or not folding up your clothes, you got punished. How was you getting punished? She locked us in the dark cellar for a day and a night without anything to eat or drink. The rotten old rats wrapper, cried the BFG. It was horrid, Sophie said. We used to dread it. There were rats down there. You could hear them creeping about. The filthy old fizzwiggler, shouted the BFG. That is the horridest thing I is hearing for years. You is making me sadder than ever. All at once, a huge tear that would have filled a bucket rolled down one of the BFG's cheeks and fell with a splash on the floor. It made quite a puddle. Sophie watched with astonishment. What a strange and moody creature this is, she thought. One moment he is telling me my head is full of squash flies, and the next moment his heart is melting for me because Miss Clonker locks us in the cellar. The thing that worries me, Sophie said, is having to stay in this dreadful place for the rest of my life. The orphanage was pretty awful, but I wouldn't have been there forever, would I? All is my fault, the BFG said. I is the one who kid-snatched you. Yet another enormous tear welled from his face and splashed onto the floor. Now I come to think of it, I won't actually be here all that long, Sophie said. I is afraid you will, the BFG said. No, I won't, Sophie said. Those brutes out there are bound to catch me sooner or later and have me for tea. I is never letting that happen, the BFG said. For a few moments, the cave was silent. Then Sophie said, May I ask you a question? The BFG wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand and gave Sophie a long, thoughtful stare. Shoot away, he said. Would you please tell me what you were doing in the village last night? Why were you poking that long trumpet thing into Gucci children's bedroom and then blowing through it? Aha, cried the BFG, sitting up suddenly in his chair. Now we are getting nosier than a Parker. And the suitcase you were carrying, Sophie said. What on earth was that all about? The BFG stared suspiciously at the small girl sitting cross-legged on the table. You is asking me to tell you whoopsie big secrets, he said. Secrets that nobody is ever hearing before. I won't tell a soul, Sophie said. I swear it. How could I, anyway? I am stuck here with you for the rest of my life. You could be telling the other giants. No, I couldn't, Sophie said. You told me they would eat me up the moment they saw me. And so they would, said the BFG. You was a human being, and human beings is like straw bunkles and cream to those giants. If they're going to eat me the moment they see me, then I wouldn't have time to tell them anything, would I? Sophie said. You wouldn't, said the BFG. Then why did you say I might? Because I is brimful of buzzburgers, the BFG said. If you listen to everything I am saying, you will be getting earache. Please tell me what you were doing in our village, Sophie said. I promise you can trust me. Would you teach me how to be an elephant? The BFG asked. What do you mean? Sophie said. I would dearly love to have an elephant to ride on, the BFG said dreamingly. I would so much love to have a jumbly big elephant and go riding through the green forest, picking peach fruits off the tree all day long. This is a sizzling hot, funk-frumping country we live in. Nothing grows in it except snozzcumbers. I would love to go somewhere else and pick peachy fruits in the clear early morning from the back of an elephant. Sophie was quite moved by this curious statement. Perhaps one day we will get you an elephant, she said, and peachy fruits as well. Now tell me, what were you doing in our village? If you is really wanting to know what I am doing in your village, the BFG said, I is blowing a dream into the bedroom of those children. Blowing a dream? Sophie said. What do you mean? I is dream-blowing giant, the BFG said. When all the other giants is galloping off, what way and which, to swallow human beings, I is scuttling away to other places to blow dreams into the bedrooms of sleeping children. Nice dreams, lovely golden dreams, dreams that is giving the dreamers a happy time. Now hang on a minute, Sophie said. Where do you get these dreams? I collect them, the BFG said, waving an arm around towards all the rows of bottles on the shelves. I has billions of them. You can't collect a dream, Sophie said. A dream isn't something you can catch hold of. You is never going to understand about it, the BFG said. That is why I is not wishing to tell you. Oh, please tell me, Sophie said. I will understand. Go on. Tell me how you collect dreams. Tell me everything. The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. Dreams, he said, is very mysterious things. They is floating around in the air like little whipsy misty bubbles, and all the time they is searching for sleeping people. Can you see them? Sophie asked. Never at first. Then how do you catch them if you can't see them? Sophie asked. Aha, said the BFG. Now we is getting on to the dark, dusty secrets. I won't tell a soul. I is trusting you, the BFG said. He closed his eyes and sat quiet still for a moment while Sophie waited. A dream, he said, as it goes whiffling through the night air, is making a tiny little buzzing, humming noise. And this little buzzing hum is so silvery soft, it is quite impossible for a human being to be hearing it. Can you hear it? Sophie asked. The BFG pointed at his enormous truck wheel ears, which had now begun to move in and out. He performed this exercise proudly, with a little proud smile on his face. Is you seeing these? He asked. How could I miss them? Sophie said. They may be looking a bit preposterous to you, the BFG said, but you must believe me when I say they is extra unusual ears indeed. They is not be coughed at. I'm quite sure they're not, Sophie said. They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing. You mean you can hear things I can't hear? Sophie said. You is as deaf as a dumpling compared with me, cried the BFG. You is hearing only thumping loud noise with those little earwigs of yours, but I am hearing all the secret whisperings of the world. Such as what? Sophie asked. So here's the BFG and his big ears. In your country, he said, I is hearing the footstep of a ladybird as she goes walking across the leaf. Honestly? Sophie said, beginning to be impressed. What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud, the BFG said. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her going thumpity thumpity clump like giant footsteps. Good gracious me, Sophie said. What else can you hear? I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil. You mean you can hear ants talking? Every single word, the BFG said, although I is not exactly understanding their language. Go on, Sophie said. Sometimes on a very clear night, the BFG said, and if I is squiggling my ears in the right direction and hear the squiddle his great ears upwards so they were facing the ceilings, if I is swiggling them like this and the night is very clear, I is sometimes hearing faraway music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed through Sophie's body. She sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you was watching me out your window last night, the BFG said. But I didn't make a sound, Sophie said. I was hearing your heart beating across the road, the BFG said, loud as a drum. Go on, Sophie said, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? Sophie asked. They is not exactly talking, the BFG said, but they is making noise. For instance, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower, if I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then the plant is screaming. I can hear it screaming and screaming very clear. You don't mean it, Sophie cried. How awful. It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting your arm right off. Is that really true? Sophie asked. You think I is swizz-figgling you? Is it rather hard to believe? Then I is stopping right here, said the BFG sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster. Oh no, I'm not calling you anything, Sophie cried. I believe you. I really do. Please go on. The BFG gave her a hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his. I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him. She could see that. I wouldn't ever be fibbing to you, he said. I know you wouldn't, Sophie said, but you must understand that it isn't easy for me to believe such amazing things straight away. I understand that, the BFG said, so please forgive me and go on, she said. He waited a little longer and then he said, it is same with trees as it is with flowers. If I is chopping an axe into the trunk of a big tree, I is hearing a terrible sound coming from inside the heart of the tree. What sort of sound? Sophie asked. A soft moaning sound, the BFG said. It is like the sound an old man is making when he is slowly dying. He paused, and the cave was silent. Trees is living and growing, just like you and me, he said. They is alive. So is plants. He was sitting very straight in his chair now, his hands clasped together tightly in front of him. His face was bright, his eyes round and bright as two stars. Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing, he said. Some of them you would never be wishing to hearing yourself, but some is glorious like music. He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. Tell me some more about them, Sophie said quietly. You just ought to be hearing the little mices talking, he said. Little mices is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them as loud as my own voice. What do they say? Sophie asked. Only the mices know that, he said. Spiders is also talking a great deal. You might not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxes, and when they is spinning their web, they is singing all the time. They is singing sweeter than the nightingale. What else do you hear? Sophie asked. One of the biggest chat bags is the caterpillars, the BFG said. What do they say? They is arguing all the time about who is going to be the prettiest buttery fly. That is all they ever talking about. Is there a dream floating around in here now? Sophie asked. The BFG moved his ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, except in the bottles. I had a special place to go to catching dreams. They is not often coming to giant country. How do you catch them? The same way you was catching buttery flies, the BFG answered, with a net. He stood up and crossed over the corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long, and there was a net at the end of it. Here is the dream catcher, he said, grasping the pole in one hand. Every morning I is going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles. Suddenly he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. I is getting hungry, he said. It is time for eats. Snozzcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-funkling giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pig wiggles is not simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It is called the snozzcumber. The snozzcumber, cried Sophie. There is no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in snozzcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humplecrip. What's that? Sophie said. And the rap rascal. The what? Sophie said. And the cubscottle. Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very known all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool? Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick, round in its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse novels. Here's the snozzcumber. Here is the repulsant snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squabble it, I mispies it, I dispunge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones, Sophie said. I know it's bones, the BFG said, but please understand, I cannot be helping if it is I sometimes is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There's never any school to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you know that. I do not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself get a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appear, and that's all it is to it. They simply appears, the same as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now, how on earth would I be knowing a thing like that? The BFG said. It was so long ago, I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is I is very old, very, very and old and crumply, perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly as giants is simply going on and on like wussy time fiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise it made was like crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthy, he sputtered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgrunturous, the BFG gurgled. It's a sickable. It's rotsome. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozzcumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snippy little winkle. Have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh, she sputtered. Oh no, oh gosh, oh help, she spat it out quickly. It tastes like a frog skins, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, groaning with laughter. To me, it's tasting like cloak couches and slime wranglers. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do, unless you is wanting to become as thin as you will be disappearing into a thick ear. In thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, that said some winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is oh such a twitch tinkling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other, they is always getting squiggled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I am speaking the most terrible wigglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anyone has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercome, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers. How absolutely quiffling. I will all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said, we don't have to eat snozcumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head profoundly in the air. I is a very honorable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up rotten snozcumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you was only a tiny little girl. This concludes our read aloud for today. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and reread Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. Then go ahead and answer the questions in your packet on Chapter 7 and 8. Mahalo for joining me today on our read aloud, and I look forward to doing this again with you. Take care, and we'll see you again. Ahui ho.